For me personally, the original Rodecaster Pro, and since last year, the Rodecaster Pro II, have been some of the most awesome and useful tools that I've ever used. But that really doesn't mean that they're right for everyone. So I promise this video is not a clickbait title. I genuinely want to take some time to talk about who the Rodecaster Pro II is for. 2 and 4. We'll start by going through why I love the Rodecaster Pro, who I think it's for, who I think it's not for, and then also some of my thoughts about what to do if you're somebody who owns the original Rodecaster Pro or a similar mixer interface recorder and you're wondering whether or not the upgrade is worth it. When it comes to why I love the Rodecaster Pro so much, it really goes back to before the original Rodecaster Pro came out, and I spent several years piecing together podcast setups using just different pieces of gear because there was nothing like this. I think we kind of take these all-in-one mixer interface recorders for granted now, but they weren't really a thing. And so to create a podcast setup meant you needed some kind of mixer that could run, in my case, it was 4 microphones. You needed some way for all 4 of those people, plus a 5th person who was like the producer, to monitor everything. And then you needed a way to record it all, to run an output from that into some kind of recorder. And then if you wanted any kind of processing, ultimately what you ended up with was a whole table just filled with different gear pieced together and a mess of cables and wires. And so when the original Rodecaster Pro, mine is still right there, when that first came out, that's why I ordered it right away and was amazed by it, because it just solved all of those problems. And so that's the background to my excitement, my enthusiasm about the Rodecaster Pro. And so when I got that, it was just, this is amazing. I want to share this excitement with everybody because it's just so friggin' fantastic. And the thing with the original Rodecaster Pro is because it was the first of its kind, Rode really had to adapt as time went on. It was originally meant as a podcasting tool. And then over the years, it was adopted by the streaming community. It was even used for a lot of people for live events, even a little bit of music production, which is not really what its original intent was. And so Rode, over those years, the 3 or 4 years that it was the main device, they put out like, I don't know, a dozen pretty awesome firmware updates that really changed the functionality. The Rodecaster Pro I, the original one that's sitting right here, internally, and the way you use it is so different from what this exact same device was the day that I got it because of all those different firmware updates. It's basically just maxed out as far as what it can do reliably. And so the Rodecaster Pro II sort of picks up where that leaves off, and not only from the ground up is designed to accommodate podcasters and streamers and even a bit of live event or music production, although hopefully more features for those things will be added as time goes on. But this has already gotten a decent number of firmware updates and feature upgrades and has already changed quite a bit since it came out. But internally, this is 16 times more powerful than the original. And what it currently does not use all of that power. So what Rode did is they intentionally built in headroom that they may or may not ever need. But just because as time goes on, you can't always predict where things go and what these devices are going to need to do. And so they wanted to make sure that there's enough flexibility in this that it can continually be updated. It just solves so many problems. And the Rodecaster Pro II kind of took everything that the original does and then improved upon it. And the few complaints that I had with the original, it addresses those. You don't need boosters anymore because the preamps are so clean. The headphone amps are super clean, so you don't hear any hissing or buzzing. The EQ has gotten a little bit better. You can custom assign your faders. You can custom assign your outputs to every different output source. You can create custom output mixes for every headphone and monitor. It's almost overwhelming in a way that everything that you can do with the Rodecaster Pro II. It's kind of gotten to that point where it's so big, it's hard to even cover everything that it can do. So for me, it's my main audio thingy that I use. Typically when I record videos, if I'm just doing a talking head video that doesn't have a mic in the shot, I do just run the audio directly into my camera because that's simple and the camera can handle it. But other times if I'm streaming, or like right now, if I have a microphone in my face, I'm using the Rodecaster Pro II. I use it for all my podcasts. I use it also just as my interface for sending audio in and out of my computer. I use it for calls. I've used it for online classes. But just because I love it for those reasons doesn't mean everybody else is going to love it for those reasons too. And the biggest thing is that I think it can definitely be overkill in a lot of situations. Now, if money is not an issue for you, if you have a budget where the price of the Rodecaster doesn't matter, then who cares if it's overkill, honestly? Like, just go ahead and get it. It doesn't matter if you don't use most of the features. They're there. And then you have this really cool interface that will definitely meet any and all of your needs as time goes on. But I know most people aren't going to want to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on something that they're not going to use most of. And sometimes that really is what happens with the Rodecaster. So keeping that in mind, let's start talking about who the Rodecaster Pro is for. Ultimately, the bread and butter of the Rodecaster Pro is mixing multiple XLR microphones. And the Rodecaster Pro II does have combo XLR 1/4 inch jack, so you can connect instruments as well, like this is my bass cable right here, or you can stick with XLR. But if you have multiple microphones and you want to connect them all to one thing, this is a very easy way to do that, especially because you have individual phantom power for every XLR channel. And the preamps, like I mentioned a minute ago, are so good that you don't need any boosters with dynamic mics, even something like the Shure SM7B. I'm using a condenser microphone right now, the Lewitt LCT-440 Pure. And so that signal, you wouldn't need a booster on any other interface anyway because it's running off of phantom power. The Pure is purely running off of phantom power. But also the Rodecaster Pro is great if you want sound pads for, effects and EQ. They can be good for just, why did the chicken cross the road? It's none of your business kind of things. Or if you want to actually load in like interviews or sound clips, you can do all that here just like you could with the original Rodecaster Pro. You can pre-program some EQ, pre-program effects in here. If you want built-in EQ, like you can see my channel, my microphone here, but we can go into the processing and change things for every one of these channels here. You have a lot of flexibility just built right in. You have the option to do multi-track or stereo track or both if you want. You can connect this to 2 computers or 2 devices at the same time as an output source. You've got 4 built-in headphone amps to send 4 different signals out. And you have the flexibility to change all of these channels. So while there are 6 physical faders here, the Rodecaster Pro II has 9 channels, and you can assign, mix and match whatever you want between physical channels and virtual channels. And so while it's doing all that, mixing things together as a mixer, it's also acting as an interface for multiple computers if you want, and it is a built-in high-quality recorder, so you don't even need to use it with a computer if you don't want to. Plus, it's got all these really cool lights, and it just looks awesome, which is silly, but I really love the colorfulness of the Rodecaster Pro II. Probably not a reason to buy it, but definitely a perk of having it. And you also have the versatility of being able to mount it like I have right now on a VESA mount, or just leaving it flat on your desk. Sometimes when you're dealing with audio, it's easy for your workspace to get overrun with cables and stuff, and this is very easy to keep clean and organized. Genuinely, honestly, the Rodecaster Pro II is just head and shoulders above everything else, any of the other mixers, interfaces, even the original Rodecaster Pro II. If you're starting from scratch, nothing else really comes close to this in terms of the entire complete package. One of the most common questions I get from people is they say they love the Rodecaster, but they're on a budget. So what's something that does everything the Rodecaster Pro II does at like a fraction of the price? And while I totally understand where they're coming from, my thought is, if that existed, why wouldn't I just be using that? Why would I want to use a more expensive thing if there was a way better thing or equally as good thing that was way cheaper? I would just use that instead. So there really aren't any true alternatives that do everything the Rodecaster Pro II does. However, if you do need some of the Rodecaster Pro features on a budget, the thing I recommend the most is the Zoom PodTrak P4. I have a whole video on that, but it's a 4-channel, super small portable recorder. So you can still run 4 XLR mics. You still have a few sound pads in there. It has a decent amount of internal gain where you might not need a booster with dynamic mics, although it can get a little bit noisy, but it's also super portable and the price is really good. So it's kind of a cool thing just to have anyway because of that portability. You can just take it anywhere. It can run off batteries super easily. And then you have this very, very tiny podcasting studio. And you can usually get that for well under $200. So the P4 is really the only other alternative I would look at because the other mixers like this are, even though they're a little bit cheaper, it's very much worth spending the difference to jump into the Rodecaster Pro II. And ultimately, I think it's important to be honest with yourself because if you really want the Rodecaster Pro II, but you try to satisfy yourself by getting something like a P4 or a Mixcast or something that's less expensive, while those might be great devices, you'll probably still end up wanting this and end up spending the money on this anyway, and then you'll have spent more money because you'll have bought the thing you really didn't want and then the thing that you actually do want. So just, if this is what you want, I promise you it's worth it. Jump in, get it. You'll have a ton of fun with it. But that doesn't mean that it's for everyone. So let's talk about who the Rodecaster Pro II isn't for. There are legitimate cases where it is just not the right fit for some people. My wife in her setup does not want a Rodecaster Pro ever. Like, she absolutely does not want a Rodecaster Pro in her office. She runs her microphone into a Focusrite Scarlett, and that is as intense and advanced as she wants to get. And that's great. And there are lots of people in those situations. So if all you need is a way to get an XLR microphone into your computer, you don't need the Rodecaster Pro. If you just need an interface, you don't need recording, you don't need EQ and effects, you just want a way to get the signal from a microphone into a computer, this is definitely overkill. And you can just get an interface like a Focusrite Scarlett is kind of a classic. My interface of choice is the Vocaster II, which is a little more expensive, but I like the ones that have 2 XLR inputs, even though they are a little bit more expensive. And this one I like specifically because it has a ton of clean gain in it, so you can run dynamic microphones without a booster. There's also stuff like the Rode AI1, and then something like the Lewitt Connect 6. There's all these little simple things that are interfaces. They don't really have, any of the mixing controls. They don't have the EQ, but they will let you plug in an XLR microphone and connect it to your computer, and then that's all you need to do. And some of them, like the Focusrite Scarlett Solo and the Rode AI1, are single channel interfaces, so that's just one microphone and you're done. They're the least expensive. I definitely recommend, though, getting at least 2 channels, because you never know. At some point, you might want to plug in a second microphone, and it's just nice to be able to have that functionality built right in. These do not record, they do not have effects processing, they don't really have any kind of EQ, they're just interfaces, and that's it. But even though they're super simple, they are super solid, and they work really well, and they're great on a budget. Now, talking about overkill, one thing I do want to touch on is I'm really not a fan of the idea that you need to deserve your gear. I think you should be financially responsible. You shouldn't go into debt to get new pieces of gear. I think that you should always evaluate your needs to get what's best for you. But if you're somebody who wants a Rodecaster Pro II, even though you're only plugging in one microphone, but you just really want this and you have the budget for it, there's nothing wrong with that. If someone wants to get an Ari Alexa to film talking head YouTube videos, more power to them. As long as you're having fun and the tools you're using let you do what you want to do, that's really all that matters. So I definitely wouldn't recommend staying away from the Rodecaster because you feel like you don't deserve it. That's just not a thing. That's just a self-limiting belief, as some people would call it. And that also ties into if you're somebody who does a lot of editing with audio on your computer, if you use a software program like Audition or Logic or Audacity or something, then you might not need a lot of the features that the Rodecaster Pro has, because once that audio signal is in your computer, you're just going to do everything there. I love using the Rodecaster because when I do podcasts, I can do everything internally. I can play the intro, mix in different sound sources, play the outro, have it recorded, and as soon as I stop pressing record, the show is done and ready to be uploaded. And that kind of workflow is pretty amazing. So that's a strength of the Rodecaster. But if you don't need something like that, if you don't mind just recording into other software and editing and processing that way, then again, simple interface could totally be the way to go. But now let's dive into that gray area. If you're somebody who has something like the original Rodecaster Pro, or maybe the Tascam Mixcast 4 or the Zoom PodTrak P8, something like that, and you're wondering if it's worth upgrading from what you have to the Rodecaster Pro II. This is definitely a personal opinion based on my own individual experience, but in most cases, if that describes you, you already have one of those things, then I don't think it's worth upgrading to the Rodecaster Pro II. If you're jumping in from scratch and you have nothing and you want to get one of those all-in-one mixer interface recorders, then I wouldn't even consider the other options and I would only go for the Rodecaster Pro II. But if you're already there, those are still really good things, even if they haven't been updated in a while, or in the case of something like Zoom, will basically never be updated. Or in the case of the Rodecaster Pro I, which probably isn't going to be getting any more firmware updates because it's kind of maxed out, they're still really good. They're never going to get less good than they are. So if it's meeting your needs right now, it's still going to meet your needs, even if there's a better option out there. So if you take an honest look at what you do and whether or not your current device meets your needs, that I think is the best way to decide whether or not an upgrade is worth it. If you're finding yourself doing a lot of workarounds, or maybe you're using a whole bunch of boosters and you don't want to deal with that, or something along those lines, then maybe upgrading could be worth it. But if the thing you have is already meeting all of your needs and you're doing everything that you want to do with it, there's nothing that this is going to do that's going to totally change your workflow. If you have one of those first generation devices, the things that the Rodecaster Pro II would give you over that, the biggest one are the preamps. Now the Mixcast and the P8 have better preamps than the original Rodecaster, but they're still a little bit noisy. So depending on your microphone, even though you can get the levels that you want, you might find that you're hearing a bit of hiss and noise. If you really want the absolute most amount of clean, quiet gain possible, That's what you have to gain from the Rodecaster Pro II. If you want more control over EQ, if you want more control over your output mixes, then that's also where the Rodecaster Pro II has an advantage. And if you want more versatility when it comes to assigning your channels and your inputs and your output mixes, then the Rodecaster Pro II has a lot to offer. So depending on your workflow, those improvements may or may not be a big deal. If you use condenser microphones, then the amount of clean gain in the preamps honestly doesn't really matter, and you're probably fine with whatever you're using right now. If you don't use a lot of built-in EQ and processing, then who cares that the Rodecaster Pro II can do more than the other ones because you don't use it, so it doesn't really matter. But if you are feeling limited by your current device, then that is where an upgrade might actually make a difference. And so while it's not for everyone, there are definitely a lot of pros to the Rodecaster Pro II. And speaking to also of things that have a lot of pros, thank you to everyone who helps support my channel through Patreon and YouTube channel memberships. And before the video ends, I wanted to talk about this because I'm excited about this. This, like I mentioned, is the Lewitt LCT-440 Pure. I made a video not that long ago about the 240 being basically like the best sounding microphone that I have, and it's super underrated. And a lot of people said you need to try the 440, and so this is the 440. It's very similar in terms of size and design. The biggest difference is the capsule. This has a huge, large diaphragm condenser capsule, and this has a smaller one. The thing I'm even maybe more excited about right now, though, is this little adapter here, because in my video for the 240, I said a reason I don't use it is because I can't position it on my boom arm the way that I want. Using a bunch of small rig parts, I rigged up this thing that has a bunch of, I think this is like 7 different adapters that go together, and then it can fit on here and position the mic where I want. And it works okay. It's not super sturdy, but someone recommended this thing to me. This is the Audio-Technica AT8459. And it's basically a professional version of the thing that I made. You can connect it to your boom arm or your mic stand, and then it has a very strong ball mount here that lets you position the mic. And now because of that, I can use shock mounts that are sort of one directional and face them. And now it opens up so much more versatility with microphones I want to use that I can't always use because of the direction they face. So that's awesome, and it puts a smile on my face.